Good evening. Glad you're tuning in. We are back at Daniel chapter 2. If you have your Bibles, if you have the notes, hopefully you do. If you don't, you can contact us. We will make sure we send you the notes to where you can follow along with our study. So let's open up in prayer and we'll get cranking. God, thank you so much for the beautiful day, the great sunshine. Thank you for the people that are here. Thank you for the meal that was provided for us. Thank you for the support that was offered yesterday to Miss Linda. It's just good to be able to love on her as much as she loves on us. But Lord, tonight we are here not just for the fellowship, not just for the camaraderie, but God, we are here to talk about your word, to dive in, to see what you have us to see and to understand. So I ask for wisdom, for understanding, discernment. I pray that you would protect the conversations that are had, both what is said and what is heard. And that ultimately you would gain the glory in all of it. I pray that you would help us to see ourselves somewhere in this story and to glean something that can help us to be better followers of you. In Jesus' name, amen. So in Daniel chapter 2, the first 23 verses, we've got, if you remember from last week, King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, the same dream over and over, but it's a dream that stole his sleep, that just disrupted his spirit so much that he had trouble sleeping. So he calls his wise guys in and asks them, hey, I need you to help interpret this dream. And they were like, well, sure, we'd be happy to. Tell us the dream. We'll tell you what it means. And he's like, no, we're not going to play it that way. If you're really as smart as you are, then you will tell me what the dream was as well as what it meant, or else you could tell me whatever and I won't know. But if I know that you tell me the right dream, then I know that you'll tell me the actual interpretation of that dream. And they look at him and say, there's no way we can do that. That's not humanly possible. And he's like, well, fine. I'll take your life and find somebody that can. So they again deny the request because legitimately they cannot do it. So he puts out the decree that all the wise men should be killed. Well, Daniel hears. He goes to Arioch, which is the guy that's kind of over the killing machine. And Arioch says, yeah, this is the decree. I can't do anything about it. You have to die. So he's like, put me in front of the king. So he goes in front of the king and says, King, listen, I will tell you your dream. I will tell you the interpretation of it. Just give me some time. So the king, for whatever reason, grants him the time. Daniel immediately goes back to his guys, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. And he says, guys, here's the deal. Here's what's happening. We need to pray. Not just to save our lives, but just that God will intervene in this situation. And that is exactly what they do. They don't consult other people. They don't consult other gods. They don't consult anything else. They go to the source of the one who they knew could absolutely tell them not only the interpretation of the dream, but actually the dream itself. And lo and behold, in a vision, he was given the dream, but also the interpretation of the dream. And that is kind of where we pick up. But before we get to where we are in the story, I want us to be reminded of what did Daniel do immediately following the revealing of the dream and the interpretation of it. What did Daniel do? Does anybody remember? He blessed God. First thing out of his mouth. It wasn't like, hey, let's go talk to the king. Let's go talk to everybody. It's, God, you know what? You are the man. I knew I could trust you. I knew that your wisdom would be perfect, and I knew that you would come through. And lo and behold, you have. All glory goes to you. And what a great reminder to all of us that even in the smallest things, when God intervenes and we just know that the good has worked out, we should automatically, the first place we should go to is always to the feet of Jesus to say thank you. And so let's pick up in verse 24, and we'll just read the first verse here. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. I love this verse because the first thing after Daniel praises the Lord, which is always should be what it is, who's the first person he goes to? It's not to the king. The king is the one that just put the decree out. Daniel, he already knows he's got the answer. He goes to the source of the killing and says, hey, stop. He's already looking out for the lives of other people before he even goes to the king himself. I think that's phenomenal. He knows he has the answer. He is that confident in the fact that he has the answer from God that he goes and he stops Arioch. So he goes to Arioch first, not the king, which just shows the confidence in the answer that was given to him, that he takes his time and goes through the proper channels. Again, he had already talked to Arioch first, right? Before he went to talk to the king. So he's following the proper channels again, which is vital and important. It's very wise to do that. Verse 25. Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him. Now watch what he says. This is so good. It's so funny. I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. I found a guy who will tell you what you need to know. Is that what worked? No, Daniel came to him first, right? Give me a chance, I'll tell the king. Put me in front of the king. So he gets in front of the king. Now that he's back with the answer, he goes to Arioch and says, I've got the answer. Stop doing what you've been doing. And Arioch goes in front and says, hey, king, all these other wise guys couldn't do it, but I did it. I found the guy that's going to be able to tell you the interpretation of this dream. Isn't that so much like our world? Daniel was the one in verse 16 that actually offered to even try. Arioch was just killing guys. Let's go 26 through 30. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Notice the question. Are you able? Right? Are you, Daniel, able to tell me not only the dream, but the interpretation of the dream? Verse 27, Daniel answered in the presence of king and said, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets. And he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, the secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living. But for our sakes who make known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. Daniel says, well, I appreciate that you want to know from me the dream, but let me set the stage first. I can't tell you what it is. Now, in that moment, I would imagine the king's like, well, what are we doing? This is a waste of time. Yeah. In fact, Daniel goes, excuse me, a step further and says, not only can I not tell you, but these other wise guys that you've called, all of the major 4 players in this thing, they can't tell you either. It's not possible for any man to tell you, king, the dream. Now, he's already heard that from the other wise guys, remember? Because that's the reason that the edict went out of, hey, we're going to kill all these men. But Daniel quickly follows that up with saying, but the God of heaven can tell you the dream. The God that I serve, the one that I went to, he has revealed to me the dream that I may reveal it to you. And the things that you've been struggling with are the things that you're worried about. You're worried about what's going to happen after this, how this is all going to play out. That's why you're losing sleep, king. And so the God of heaven has revealed it. So in our notes, it says, the question is, what is the dream and what does it mean? That's the question of the day. That's what King Nebuchadnezzar is wanting to know. And Daniel starts. He says, no way your skilled, educated men will be able to do this. Not possible. And Daniel, again, reminds the king of all 4 of those classifications, just to be clear that they would not be able to do it. But he's very quickly to say, God can. God can. And therefore, he is distinguishing very clearly the wisdom of men versus the wisdom of God. He says all of these men that have studied the Chaldean rule, all of this knowledge and studying that they've done cannot afford them the opportunity or the know-how to tell a man's dream nor the interpretation of it. But God can. God knows the inner workings of our heart. He knows the inner workings of everything about us. God is absolutely able to do it. And for me, when I look at this, this is an opportunity of a lifetime. This is Daniel leveraging what he knows about God in the face of the most powerful man on the planet at this point in time to tell him there is a God that can tell you all these things. God can. What a great opportunity. When we see latter days in this verse, it's referring to the end times of what is to come. And he says your anxiety is connected to what will happen to you and your kingdom. But only God knew it. And he was going to reveal it in a way that you would absolutely be able to understand. So any questions or thoughts on 24 through 30 of Daniel chapter 2?
I think Daniel would have said, like in his sentence after soothsayers came, I think he would have said, but there is a God. And pause there for a second.
Sure. He would have paused right after that, but there is a God. Sure. Now, in a little bit, because it says the God of heaven. I can't remember if we talked about it last week, if we're getting ready to talk about it. I can't remember. But a lot of times when the Babylonians would talk about their gods, they would say gods of the earth. But Daniel is always quick to emphasize it is the God of heaven. Not gods, but always God, and it's always of heaven, because all the other gods were gods of the earth. Very small distinction, may not mean a whole lot to us, but in this culture, it meant the world. Any other thoughts? Anybody else? No? Okay, let's keep going then. It's only going to get crazier. Verse 31, you, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. Now, before we keep reading, I want you to think about this. Daniel is getting ready to tell the king his dream. That's not normal, just so you know. And I can imagine the king sitting back like, whatever, give it your best shot. And Daniel starts, and he says, what you saw was an image, and this image was amazing. It was massive, and it was glorious, and it was awe-inspiring. I'm sure maybe threw more adjectives out there. I can sense the king kind of sitting up a little bit in his seat. Like, tell me more. You've got me hooked. Prove what you're saying. He goes on. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Now that is a very weird dream. But in his telling of it, he is extremely descriptive, so much so that I bet the king was now all ears. It's so detailed and so clear and precise that I'm sure the king was like, yes, that's exactly what I saw. Now, put yourself in the king's shoes. The king has built this massive powerhouse in the world, and he sees this massive image with gold, silver, bronze. What was the other one? Thank you. Clay and iron. This is a massive thing, and it's got to be so confusing to him. But he knows it means something. This image is so big, it's got to be something with power and authority. But then the elements that are used, they kind of decrease as they go down, and there's some differences about it. And I would imagine he just doesn't understand. And then to see a stone cut out of a mountain with no hands, just taken out and used to crush this mighty statue, this mighty image, to where it just falls to the ground and is pummeled to the point of just being dust. So when the wind blows, it's blown away. And all that is left is this massive stone that basically turns into a mountain that takes over the whole world. Now that's a dream. I've had lots of dreams that I'm like, man, that's just weird. Dreams that I'd much rather never have again, right? This one is happening over and over and over. So much so that he is just so bothered by it that he can't sleep. And I would imagine if he can't sleep, it's going to ruin his day, because now all he's thinking about is this image and it being crushed in this rock. And what does it mean? And then he calls his guys who are supposed to be his friends and helpers and confidants and smart people, and they can't help him. And now he's just utterly frustrated. It's got to be frustrating, right? So let's look at the dream. It's awe-inspiring. It's got his attention. He's losing sleep over it. We know that. We know that it's more than once because in verse 1 it says dreams. That's more than one. We know that it tells us that the head was made of gold. The breast and arms were silver. The belly and thighs were brass. The legs were iron. And then the feet were iron and clay. Now, positionally, the head is the best. Gold, then silver, then bronze or brass, and then iron, and then iron and clay. So we know positionally the head is the top. It's the most important. And as we go down and get to the bottom, it lessens in value. So the value decreases from top to bottom. The weight decreases from top to bottom. But the hardiness of it, the hardness of this increases from top to bottom. So it's harder up top, and then it gets just softer. But then we get to the stone. The stone is the peculiar part of this. It's a random stone that's cut out of nothing, or out of a mountain, out of another rock. But it's not cut out by hands. It's not cut out by tools. It's just taken out, which shows that it's not of human origin. It crushes the feet. And when the feet go, what happens? Everything goes. Y'all know that. Everything falls and is crushed to dust. Wind blows it away. The stone becomes a mountain, meaning it overtakes the earth. So the king, now that Daniel has revealed this monumental vision or dream that the king has been having, I'm sure is anxious to hear the interpretation of it. Especially for the fact that Daniel has told him his dream exactly the way that he has seen it. And he wants to know. So let's see what he says. Verse 36, this is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king. Notice that he says we. Who's the we here? Yeah. I love that. One of the things that we tried to start doing once I became the pastor is we tried to change a lot of our language and how we said things. Like a lot of times we'd say my church, but it's not my church, it's God's church. Or my land, or my parking lot, or it's ours, it's God's. And so changing just the subtleties of how we see things and speak about things can actually bring us into a closer walk, a better understanding of really how we get to where we are. And so Daniel, in this moment, this isn't his interpretation, it's not his dream. God revealed it to him. So God is speaking through him. So it's we will share. You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. Again, who has given it to him? Not the gods of the earth, but the God of heaven. Again, a big distinction there. And he's given the king his credit. You are the king of kings. You are the powerful king at this moment, but only because the God of heaven has put you there. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. Now, if I was King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, I would love to hear that. You are the king of gold. You are the head of this statue. You are the best, the brightest, the smartest, the most valuable. Right? I can only imagine the king's like, yeah. Not even thinking about the fact that he knows the stone's going to crush us in a minute, because that's what happens to us a lot of times. We know the end result of bad decisions, but we get flattery starts taking over, and we make that bad decision anyway because it's about our ego. And Daniel knows, and he says, hey, you're the head. You're the gold representation of this image. But after you shall rise another kingdom inferior to yours. Then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. The kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. As you saw iron mixed with the ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. I love the confidence in which this young man speaks. He's just confident in not his ability, but in his God. He knows God has revealed this to him. He is confident in it, and he looks straight this king in the eye and says, hey, what I've told you, it is certain and it is sure. It is legitimate. And so, first thing that we see in verse 36 is this has been given by God. His kingdom, the dream, the interpretation, his power, his authority, everything that King Nebuchadnezzar has is because of God, the God of heaven. Now, again, as I said before, Babylonians would refer to their gods as the gods of the earth. But this phrase is said, again, to make sure that King Nebuchadnezzar knows that this is not one of their gods. It's not one of their gods. God of heaven, as opposed to God of the earth, gods of the earth, totally different subset here. God is a standalone God. He needs no other. He is by himself, and he is the God of heaven. These other gods over here, they're just gods of the earth. They don't really matter or mean anything. It's an acknowledgement of his authority. And again, Daniel is helping him understand, like, you rule basically most of the world. It's unquestioned and it's unchallenged. We know that you are powerful. But then he says there are kingdoms that are going to follow. After you, someone's going to come in and take you out. But each kingdom that will follow will actually be weaker than before. So even though you will be defeated by them, they will still be a weaker styled kingdom. Less than, they're smaller, even though they are powerful. The Medo-Persian Empire divides Babylonia into two. Greece comes in with Alexander the Great and takes out the Medes and the Persians. And then the fourth kingdom will actually be the Roman rule, which carries into our current time period. There's no other major world empire that will be created such as Babylon until Christ establishes his earthly reign. Now, there are going to be a lot of powerful empires. We've seen a lot of powerful empires. In fact, we're going to, I'm sure, see some trying to form in the near future. But nothing will be as powerful as Babylon was, and nothing will be as powerful as Christ will be when he returns to establish his earthly kingdom. There will be attempts, but they will fail because we see that iron and clay do not mix. The feet are representative of what we are going through now. It's what's happening now. And so I put on there the example of China and Russia. I mean, they are the major power players right now, and they're always in talks, and I'm sure there are secret things that we have no idea what's going on. But can you imagine those two trying to mix? It's just not going to work. There's too much power at stake. There's too much control at play. And they just will, they're just, without being rude, they're just two evil nations. And when you get evil people together, you can't trust anybody. You can have all the agreements and shake all the hands and sign all the papers you want, but at the heart of an evil person is just pure evil. And so it just won't mix. It just will not work. So let's get into this image. We know that Babylon is the gold image, the gold head. That's after the god of gold, which is Marduk. And gold was used extensively in their buildings, in their images, and in their shrines. So Babylon just loved gold. They used gold extensively. And so it is the representation because it is the most valuable. It was the most powerful. It was the head of this time period. And then we get into the Medo-Persian. They conquer Babylon in 539 BC and united in 550 BC. They represent the two arms to one chest. And their power comes from the money that they have, which is why they are silver in color. The next kingdom that comes along is Greece, which is Alexander the Great. He conquers the Medo-Persian Empire in 331. And it's one belly and two thighs, because when he takes them on and beats them, he is one united kingdom, but he dies early, and the kingdom is divided in fours by his four generals, which two really only carry on some type of great worth. And so that is why they have the great significance, and it's only the two legs. And they were bronze because most of their weaponry was bronze. And then Rome comes along in 146, conquers Greece, and they are the two legs representing the two different divisions of Rome, which is the east and the west. Rome is the capital in the east, Constantinople in the west. And they are iron because of their weaponry as well. And they just crushed everybody. When they were in rule, they just smoked everybody. And then lastly, we have the Gentile domination. It's the end of Roman rule until now. It is the feet. It is the iron, which is the strong military, which we know military is all over the place, all over our world. But the clay represents the weak and brittle governments and the rule that they have. And they just do not mix. Our countries just don't mix anymore. Then we talk about the 10 toes, which will be equal to the 10-nation confederation reviving of Rome. And we see that 10 toes are mentioned in Daniel chapter 2, verse 42. It's also reminiscent of the horns in Revelation chapter 17, verse 12. And so as Daniel is telling King Nebuchadnezzar, I'm sure there's to some degree sadness in his gaze. Because yes, his ego was boosted as you are the king of all this free world right now, and you are the gold head of this wonderful image, but you're going to lose. It's going to be taken away from you. And I'm sure that's disheartening to him. But now he's listening to, yeah, but that group that's going to overtake you, they're going to get overtaken as well. And then that group, they're going to get overtaken as well. And then at some point, this entire statue, this entire image that you are seeing is going to be just wrecked. And that is where Daniel gets to our part, God's part. God is going to set up shop. The stone that is taken out is none other than Christ, because he was not formed by human hands. He was carried by a human, but he was formed by God in Mary's womb. Marduk is also associated with a great mountain. He's associated with the divine. And so for him to be taken out of the mountain, that's a big deal. God will cut out a stone. The stone is divine, and only God can establish it. And it is definitely connected with Revelation 17. Think about, if you can think back into our study of Revelation, I know it wasn't too long ago, when Christ came, when he comes Not the first time in the cloud to take us home, but when he comes in that second time for his triumphal second coming, what is he coming to do? You may remember? Establish his kingdom. He's coming to take house. He's coming to wreck everybody and establish his kingdom. So he's coming to take this Gentile rule, this new Roman rule or Babylonian rule, whatever you want to call the earthly reign of the Antichrist and the beast. Christ is coming and he will wipe them all out. And he will establish his rule on the earth. It is that stone that will come out of nowhere that will crush that Gentile rule, and all of the kingdoms that are based on it will fall and be darted away for the new foundation of the kingdom to be established. That's pretty cool to me. And it's really cool because this was all the way back. How far back? 500 something BC? That's amazing, just so you know. That's like 2,500 years ago that Daniel interpreted this vision for King Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful man on the planet at this point in time, and says, just so you know, in the future, you think you've got it all figured out, but somebody's going to come along, take you out, and somebody's going to take them out, somebody's going to take them out, and then the earth's going to think that they've got it all under control. But I just want you to know that this random stone that's cut out by the hands of God is going to come and just wipe y'all out. And that's the revelation that Daniel gave 2,500 years ago. And we're just waiting for it to happen. Anxiously, I may say. So it's definitely connected to Revelation chapter 17. Now, let's look at the last page of notes before we finish out our chapter. So a lot of the theologians, if you read them, there's the two thought lines here with the stone. The stone could be the first advent of Christ, or the first showing or appearing of Christ. With the fourth kingdom existed when Christ was on earth, meaning that rock already came, crushed it, and he established his kingdom on the earth when he was actually here living. That Christianity began to spread and grow then. Christ is now the chief cornerstone, and the days of those kings, and then Rome fell into the hands of the 10 kingdoms. That's one thought line. I don't subscribe to that. I subscribe to the next thought. That the stone that is going to crush these kingdoms is actually his second coming. Because Christ did not destroy the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was still in full force after Christ died and resurrected. It was still moving along at a pretty good clip. The stone will be a mountain suddenly, meaning when he shows up to establish his rule and reign, it will be instantaneously. It will not be as the Christian movement has taken on since Acts chapter 2. It's taken on a long time. This stone will be instant. There will be no guessing. There will be no wondering, when is it going to happen? It's done. It's done. He will overtake and establish his kingdom quickly. Rome wasn't divided and didn't have 10 kings. So the idea that that's what was happening in Rome, it doesn't fit the narrative of actually what was happening. And the kingdom of Christ will fill the earth after removal of the Gentile powers, meaning it's going to look like a big, massive rock that overtakes the earth, because that's exactly what it's going to be. So any thoughts on the revelation of the dream, 36 through 45, before we finish out the chapter? Yes, sir.
Right on the point you were just making, how are you seeing this happen quickly?
Yes, great question. How am I seeing that it's happening quickly? Because of going to Revelation 17. Okay. So when he comes back, it's going to be a really quick war, and it's going to fall, and he's going to take over. That's how I make the play that it's going to happen quickly. You can't see it in Daniel. It's not there in Daniel, but it is elsewhere to help us to see that. Yes?
I think it's interesting that the stone that they built.
Yes, yes. That's good. The stone that the builders rejected is the same stone that's coming in, not only to wipe everything up, but to set up the new kingdom and establish its presence on the earth. Absolutely. Good point, Phil. Anybody else? Yeah.
I know you kept referring to it as a massive stone. My mind goes back to David and Goliath.
Oh, yeah.
You know, maybe the scale is different a little bit because you got massive statues. So maybe instead of a pebble, it's like a fist size stone.
Maybe.
It kind of goes, whoop, and just kind of bounces off the foot, but the whole thing explodes.
Quite possible.
I mean, that would be a little more God, the way God would be.
Well, yes, because he took a pebble and took out a giant. So why would he do anything different?
Why take this massive stone and crush it with a little stone?
Yeah, to show his power and authority over this massive thing. Good point. Might be. Who knows? Ed?
Looking at the feet of the statue, the iron and the clay mix, all the kingdoms were resting on the feet.
Yes.
For the foundation, and that's not a stable foundation. Iron and clay won't work. And they think of ever since Nimrod tried to set up the first one world government, they've never been stable. God doesn't approve of them. They don't get on them, and they don't last. At some point, they collapse under their own weight or the way somebody else is acting. Because the only one who can successfully maintain the world government is the head of the cornerstone.
That's awesome. That's good. That's a great point. The kingdom being spread out into the 10 toes, it really just doesn't work. It's just not stable, and it will give way. But the chief cornerstone, that's something else. It's a whole different ballgame. Yes, ma'am. Yes. He's working with everyone. Yes. Right. And what's interesting about that is he does spread his power out over those guys. But what they do, they just turn it back to him. They're like, you know what? You got it. Which is funny to me. But it tells us the power that he has over them to convince them that I'm really good. I'm really the guy. Anybody else? Yes.
You know, it could have been, let's say, a sword that chopped off every layer as he talked about it. But he used the feet, the weakest part of this creation to show them that, you know, it's not man, it's God that's holding you up. And you start trusting yourself.
Sure. That's a good point. He could have, in the dream, shown a different way of the destruction of this image by a sword coming through and cutting him off, because he loses each kingdom. But he doesn't, because the thing is still intact until the stone hits the foot, and then it all comes tumbling down. That's good. That's good. Anybody else? No? All right, let's finish out. I love this part because it just shows Daniel's intentionality in the way that he thinks through everything. And again, remember, these kids are young. He may be 18 to 21 at this point in time. If he was taken captive at 18, 3 years in, 21, making this play. If he was taken captive at 15, he's only 18, standing before the most powerful man. And watch what happens. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face. Love that. This king recognizes that there's no way all my smart guys, I've listened to them, they've done great things, but they couldn't do this. And now this youngster from another country has, and so there must be something about his God. He fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. That's funny. King answered Daniel and said, "Truly, your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and the revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret." Love that. What a bold, major statement by the most powerful man on the planet. He's like, your God, he's the God. Of all these other gods we've got, he's the one. Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. And think about the responsibility that this kid just inherited. Not only is he a ruler over the province, but he's the chief administrator over all the wise men. Wise men that may have been there for years and years and years and years and years and years. And now this young whippersnapper has come in. But if you think about it, every person that Daniel has engaged, he's won them over simply by being who Daniel is. And there probably, we'll see later on in the chapters that there was issues with the ones that he was over. They were very jealous of him. But watch what he does in verse 49. Who did Daniel go to when he needed to pray and seek God's mercies about this dream? Who did he go with? Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. He went back to his boys. Verse 49, Daniel petitioned the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. Daniel remembered those who helped him get where he was. Daniel didn't get there on his own. Daniel went back and prayed with his guys specifically that he would be able to know this dream. And because those men prayed, God heard their prayer, answered it, and allowed Daniel to be the spokesperson. But Daniel knew where his friends were. And he said, King, appreciate this offer, but I got 3 guys that helped me with this, and they need a spot. And the king's like, great. Who are they? Let me put them where we need them. And that's what happened. I love that. And so many times in our own lives, we forget about those who help us get to where we are. And maybe, just maybe, there needs to be some thanksgiving given for that. Any thoughts or questions about that? Yes, ma'am.
Learn more about him. We see the testimony in our life. We have the same privilege as Daniel. Our awesome creator, our Savior, our Redeemer. We have the same privilege. Boldly testify.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
This is who our God is. And point to Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Say, here, you can have the same privilege. You can have the same thing to be built in.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the beauty of it. That applies to us as much as to Daniel.
Sure.
We have so many testimony miracles to share with other people that God done in our own lives. That's
Yes.
such a beautiful, example for us, to boldly discuss it, because we have to know and remember what He's done for us.
Yes. I love that, Tatiana. I think we should be more excited and more open about the great things that God is doing. And I think that's what's so great about just the beginning of this story of Daniel and his friends is that they know exactly where to go first and foremost. But when he gets the answer, he doesn't pull a Gideon and say, well, let me pray again. He goes straight to Arioch and says, hey, I got the answer. Stop killing these guys. Get me in front of the king. I'm ready to tell him. Like there's no hesitation. There's no, hey guys, he gave me the dream. Let's talk about it and let's make sure it makes sense. And let's pray again. The confidence that this young man exudes is just amazing. And you're right. We should have that confidence because he does those things in our own lives. And we don't give him the credit as we should. And the fact that he just stood in front of the king and said, King, what you're asking is dumb. There's nobody that can do this. Nobody in their right mind would stand in front of you and say, I can tell you the dream, because you can't. However, my God can. And look at the response. The king fell on his face prostrate before Daniel and said, your God is the God of gods. It's big. Charlie?
So one of the things we look at in chapter 1, it says Daniel had decided,
Mhm.
basically, he decided himself, not to defile himself.
Yes.
He went to the chief of the eunuchs and he asked him.
Yes.
He said, please, he recognizes that there's a chain of command in the world and all that. But when it comes to actually hearing from God, he goes to
Arioch.
Arioch. When he's telling him this, it's still kind of a request. This guy doesn't have to.
Sure.
He knows, but he says, okay, come on, take me. I think Daniel just displays the kind of wisdom we would all do well to be like serpents and generally doves in our activities. Sometimes as Christians, we almost want to be intentionally confrontational or something.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and God really speaks to you that you just need to go tell your boss about Jesus. Well, go tell your boss about Jesus. That's what Daniel does. When God says to do it, he's as bold as can be.
Yep.
And at the end of this, when it says, it just kind of thought it was interesting. It says, he made him, Daniel, ruler over the entire province of Babylon. So Daniel's top guy.
Yeah.
So then why does he need to go to request, to petition?
That's a good point.
For anything?
Right.
Because he's being wise. Because if these appointments for his guys come directly from the king, very different than Daniel saying, hey, I'm the guy now. I'm over all you guys. I'll put my guys up there. He makes a request, a petition to the king, and it's coming from the king, which more solidifies and just shows me he's not just depending on God's wisdom. He's being smart.
Sure. That's a great point, because at this point he really does have all the power, but he still plays the game, but he plays it well, because all the way through he's always asked the proper chain of command to do what he knew he was supposed to do.
And it's so easy for us even at times to say, well, hey, I got the promotion, I'm the main.
Right. Sure.
And I don't see Daniel doing any of that. He really
No, not once.
Right, because he knows that who he is totally dependent on who God is.
Yes. That's good. That's good. Yes, sir.
When you look at the way the world is today, where everybody seems to be getting along without people, with other people, depending on other people, then you look at these four guys, how bonds they had, they work together for the improvement of everyone.
Sure.
I think that's missing a lot in our relationship.
That's good.
Even though we know, we say hello, that bond is missing, or we really are concerned about the welfare, the fact that we're involved with the good of the king and say, hey, look at these guys.
That's a really great point, and I think 2020 didn't help us with that. It even more segregated us in a big way. But I agree. I think we have lost the art of being vulnerable around each other and saying, "Hey, come with me and let's pray about this. Let's deal with this." That's good. That's good. I thought you were going to go in a different direction with that, Phil. Honestly, well, no, a good direction, a good one. I was giving you credit. This is a good one. So talking about the 10 toes and the iron and the clay not mixing, 10 means that they're separated. They're all individual. And so I thought you were going to the idea of, as we continue to segregate and depend upon ourselves, that only weakens our society because we're not coming together even more, which will make it easier to crush. That's where I thought you were going. So you're really smart. Anybody else? Yes, sir, Ed.
Still what Fabian was saying. In Daniel's time, it wasn't a temple that was destroyed. But before then, and then after him, when the second temple was built,
Right.
it was a veil that kept us out of the presence of God.
Mm-hmm.
And we should have far more confidence in Daniel could agree with that, because he had to go make a petition to an earthly king. We get to come boldly and just show up and present our petitions to the
king. Yeah, that's good. That's a great point, because And I think that's a point that a lot of us as Christians fail to remember so many times. Because again, Daniel had to go to an earthly king and really go through the proper channels to get to that earthly king. We don't. We can go straight to the Lord through Christ and say, here, let's talk. Let's have a conversation. That's good. Good point. Yes, sir.
With segregation, right now, the biggest thing with segregation is technology.
Sure.
social media.
Yep.
And it's amazing to me that the big tech
Mhm.
people are coming to power in our country.
Yeah.
And in the world, and you see it all the way through Twitter, Facebook,
Mhm.
Amazon, all that.
That's true. That is a good point. The technology, even though technology is really good because we're using it right now so you can listen in on all this, but technology it's a problem. It is a problem. It's a continuing to weaken. Even though it seems like it's strengthening our society, it's actually tearing it down even more. Yep. Playing new games. Yep. Scrolling the internet. Anybody else?
I can say something.
I bet you could.
I like it that when he goes, the first thing he says is, do not execute the wise men of Babylon. So his concern
Yes.
right up front, and I think it's a good caution for all of us. I mean, in our culture, these are ungodly men.
Yeah.
These
Just kill them all. Kill them all.
Yeah.
Yeah, keep doing it. I'm going to go talk to King. You keep going.
Take them out.
Yeah. Yep.
Put my guys in.
Absolutely.
And I think the application for me is to recognize that in political or moral debates of our day, those people are people that Christ died for.
Correct.
And if we come with this kind of contentious, we want to take them out, we should want to share in wisdom the grace that God has shown us.
Yes, that's such a great point. And I always go back to that when he goes to Arioch, because his first request is not, hey, get me in front of the king. Oh, and by the way, you don't have to kill me. It's please stop doing this. And I agree, Charlie. I think we get so irritated and caught up with the things that we know are just wrong that people are doing. But the reality is, if we can see past that and see what God sees, it should break our hearts, actually, rather than irritate us.
So many times we come with ourselves first. I don't
Yeah.
think that includes our life.
No, not once. No. Mm-mm. In fact, there's zero concern for his own life because he says, put me in front of the king.
Which could be
Death. Absolutely. Sure. Anybody? Sir. I'm so glad you're speaking before the end of class, Brian. Thank you so much.
Could it be that Daniel spares the other wise men? Because eventually they'll be the seed that bring the Magi.
That's a good point. That's a great point. It could be that these wise men that are here are the ones that carry on until we get to the Magi that are seeking Christ. That's a great thought because we don't know. We don't know. That's a good idea. Hey, Ed.
We do know, though, because Daniel is told it's going to be this long until the Messiah shows up.
And they're looking.
So he's going to be cut off at this point. That means he's born before that. And so that's, I think, why the wise men think
Because they knew. That's true.
Jews, unfortunately, didn't get it.
They certainly did not. They certainly did not. That's cool. Yep. Because they definitely were looking. I mean, that's what they said. We've read it. We've seen it. We knew what we were looking for. Now we've seen it. So where is he? Sure.
I think Daniel, as head of the wise men, I could just see him getting them all together and start reading, Genesis.
Could
telling
have.
them, this is how it is. This is why I'm good.
Sure.
Listen.
Sure. Yep. Yeah, I would imagine in their team meetings, he probably snuck stuff in all the time. And I would imagine to some degree, it's probably why they hated him so bad, is because there was just so much good in him and they couldn't figure it out, or they didn't want to figure it out. But who knows? But we do know he was good. He was good. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I think it's kind of interesting that we were formed out of the earth, and it's kind of like de-evolution by, at the strongest being gold, and then de-evolving back into dust.
Yep.
In a sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because none of it matters. It does not matter. We're all dust.
Yeah.
That's good. All right. Oh, yes, sir. Oh, yes, ma'am. Is this only because you found your Bible? I'm so glad you found it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure. That's a great thought because that's exactly what Daniel's doing. He's not promoting himself. He's telling the story of his life because of what God has done through it. And when he stands before the king, he's like, King, it ain't me. But let me tell you about who's in me and who's working through me. And that's, if we can get that confidence, I can tell my story to anybody because it's not me. It's what God has done through me. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? Oh, Tatiana, yes. Sorry. Yes.
You know where they go. You know, and that should burden our hearts so much.
Yes.
Their end is eternal. They don't worry about these people, this earthly effort. This is eternal.
Yes.
If you read the Old Testament, Jewish people, how they cared about Alexander,
Mm-hmm.
you understand. We know the end of the story. We have the whole word of God.
Yes.
The whole counsel
Mhm.
of God. That should break our hearts.
Sure.
Every soul we need to take advantage of. You pray, as you said, come before the Lord and say, I pray, so burn in my heart. For this.
Right.
I was like, hey, I'm going home, you gotta go to hell.
Right. Right. Yes. Yes. Right. Tatiana, I think that's such a great point because it goes back to what Charlie was talking about is when Daniel goes back to Arioch, it's not, hey, let me go tell the king so I can save my hind end. It's, please stop murdering these men because Daniel knows the end. And I think when he shares the testimony of the vision with him and he realizes that God really is God, that testimony that Daniel shares with him puts this dude on his face. And man, we have no idea what the sharing of our simple story, as uneventful or eventful as it may be, it doesn't matter because God's in it. And if God's in it, then let him do what only God can do and see what happens. Anybody else? Sure. Yep. Yep. Yeah. It's that easy. Yep. Yeah. As they see the presence of God just off in the distance. Yeah. Build me a calf. Yes. Yes, we do. Yeah. All right. Daniel chapter 3 next week. Right? All right. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Okay. Nope, never does. Continue to remember Linda, obviously. I had a visit with Kathy and Elmer this afternoon, long visit, and Elmer is just not doing well. Just it would be awesome if God would just be gracious, and we'll just leave it at that. So I know that sounds really cold and insensitive, but we'll just leave it there. Any other requests that I don't know about? Yes, ma'am. Yes, I do know about Bob. Did he finally get moved? Acadia? Yeah. Yes. Yes. Nice. And then have you heard anything about Will? Do we know anything about your cousin Will? Still at rehab. Okay. All right. Let's break. God, what's interesting is the same God that Daniel and his guys prayed to is the same one we're talking to tonight. And the same way that you heard them, I know that you hear us. And Lord, I'm not sure why that's hitting me funny right now, but that's just amazing to me. And the way that you intervened in a big way with Daniel and Hananiah and Azariah and Michelle and showed up in a massive way. God, I am coming before you on behalf of those that need you tonight and asking that you would just show up for them. Or I think of Bob, who's by himself, healing up, Will, Joe, especially Kathy and Elmer, Linda. Lord, there's so many others, Carol. God, there's just so many that need your presence. And I know that you are very willing and very able. And I just ask that your will be done. Lord, I know what my will is. I know what I would love for you to do. But ultimately, I don't know what's best, and you do. And so I'm just going to trust that you will do what you see fit. And help me to just trust in that and be willing to work with whatever that looks like. I pray for Kathy that you would give her rest tonight, God. Please allow her mind just to be at ease and her body to rest. And I thank you for this church. God, I love what you're doing here. I love being a part of your services and your moving spirit. God, it is a blast. And I pray that we would remain as humble servants before you, asking for your will to be done in our lives, in our church, in our community. And Lord, may you use us as you see fit. But in the same breath, may you correct us and fix us in those areas that you see fit. Give us the courage not only to hear from you, but to do what you need us to do. But thank you for being such a good God, for being a loving God and a just God and an intentional God. And I pray that you would give us all rest tonight and use us in a mighty way tomorrow. Give us the courage to speak out when the opportunity presents itself and to speak boldly and confidently, not arrogantly and not obnoxiously, but in a loving way, just as Daniel did. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks for coming tonight. Tables and chairs. You guys have a great night. We will see you next week.